This podcast is brought to you by Impor.top, the stories of top companies. Disclaimer: this AI-generated content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as investment advice. If you like our podcasts, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. And don't forget to follow us on X at Impor.top. Find thousands of stories of top companies on our website, Impor.top. PagerDuty, from Hackathon to the Ops of Operations. It is 3 a.m. A phone buzzes on a nightstand in San Francisco. The screen glows with a terse message. Critical. Payment processing service down. All transactions failing. Within seconds, an on-call engineer jolts awake, reaches for a laptop, and begins triaging the problem. Across the city, a second engineer receives an escalation. In Seattle, a third joins a virtual war room. In 90 minutes, the service is restored. The company's customers never learn how close they came to a complete outage. This is PagerDuty's world, and this invisible drama plays out thousands of times every single day across the digital economy. The premise sounds almost absurdly simple. When something breaks, make sure the right person gets woken up and help them fix it. But behind that simplicity lies one of the most fascinating stories in enterprise software. 3 former Amazon engineers, frustrated by the chaos of being on call, pushed their first commit to GitHub on February 18, 2009. From that kernel of an idea, they built a company that went through Y Combinator, raised nearly $175 million in venture capital, debuted on the New York Stock Exchange with a 60% first-day pop, and at its peak, commanded a market capitalization approaching $6 billion. Think of PagerDuty as the 911 dispatch system for the digital world. When monitoring tools detect something has gone wrong, a server is overloaded, an API is returning errors, a database is running out of space, PagerDuty is the system that figures out who should know about it, gets that person's attention immediately, and orchestrates the entire response. It does for software infrastructure what air traffic control does for aviation. It takes a chaotic stream of signals and turns it into coordinated human action. Today, PagerDuty processes billions of events per year, serves over 35,000 organizations, and has built a nearly $500 million revenue business around the unglamorous but utterly essential work of keeping the internet running. The company has also reached a genuine crossroads. Revenue growth has decelerated to single digits. The stock has lost roughly 88% of its peak value. Management is exploring a potential sale, and artificial intelligence threatens to reshape everything about how operations work. This is a story about developer tools, about the cultural revolution known as DevOps, about the relentless pressure to keep digital services running around the clock, and about what happens when a company built on a simple, painful problem tries to become something much bigger. It is also, at its core, a story about the difference between being a feature and being a platform, and whether a company that created an entire category can survive the commoditization of that category by the very forces it helped unleash. The major themes that run through PagerDuty's history are themes that define the modern enterprise software landscape. The tension between best-of-breed point solutions and all-encompassing platforms. The challenge of maintaining developer love while moving upmarket to enterprise buyers. The role of timing and secular tailwinds in company building, and the disruptive potential of AI to reshape established competitive dynamics. To understand why PagerDuty matters, you need to understand the world it was born into. And that world, circa 2009, was, to put it charitably, a mess. Picture a mid-sized SaaS company in that era. They have a dozen servers humming in a data center somewhere. They use Nagios, the open-source monitoring tool that had been the industry standard since the late 1990s, to watch for problems. When Nagios detects an issue, it sends an email. If the problem is critical, maybe it triggers an SMS to a phone number on a spreadsheet that lists who is on call this week. That spreadsheet is maintained manually in a shared Google Doc. If the person on call does not answer, the escalation policy is informal. Someone texts someone else, who calls someone else, who maybe checks their IRC channel, because Slack did not exist yet. This is not an exaggeration. This is literally how most companies handled operational incidents. The monitoring tools themselves were powerful at detecting problems, but primitive at routing the response. They could tell you that a server's CPU was at 98%, but they could not figure out who should be woken up about it, whether that person was actually available, what the escalation path should be if they did not respond within 5 minutes, or how to coordinate the response across multiple teams once the alert was acknowledged. For readers unfamiliar with the concept of on-call, it works like this. Engineering teams take turns being the designated responder, typically in weekly rotations. When you are on call, you carry a phone, or in the old days, a literal pager, and you are expected to respond to any critical alert within minutes, day or night. If you do not respond, the alert escalates to the next person in the chain. It is the engineering equivalent of being an ER doctor on the night shift, except the patient is a software system serving millions of users. The cultural context matters enormously. In the traditional IT operations model, there was a hard wall between the people who wrote the software and the people who ran it in production. Developers threw code over the wall to an operations team, and that ops team was responsible for keeping everything running. This model was already cracking by 2009. Amazon had pioneered a different approach internally, one that Werner Vogels, Amazon's CTO, captured in a phrase that would become a rallying cry for an entire movement. You build it, you run it. The same engineers who wrote the code should be responsible for running it in production. If something breaks at 3 in the morning, the developer who wrote the faulty code should be the one who gets paged. This philosophy would eventually crystallize into the DevOps movement, and later into the Site Reliability Engineering, SRE, discipline pioneered at Google. For non-technical readers, SRE is essentially the practice of applying software engineering principles to IT operations, treating operational reliability as a measurable, improvable feature of the product rather than an afterthought. Google's approach, documented in their influential 2016 Site Reliability Engineering book, created a new discipline and a new job title that thousands of engineers now hold. But in 2009, the tooling was woefully inadequate for a world where software needed to be always on, where outages cost real money, and where the people responsible for fixing problems needed to be reached reliably, instantly, and with the right context. The rise of Amazon Web Services, which had launched its core cloud services just a few years earlier, was accelerating the transition to cloud-based architectures. More services meant more complexity, more potential failure points, and a far more urgent need for reliable incident response. The old model of a single operations team monitoring a handful of servers was giving way to a world of microservices, distributed systems, and round-the-clock global operations. Someone needed to build the connective tissue between detecting a problem and resolving it. The tools existed at the extremes, monitoring on one end, ticketing systems on the other. But the critical middle, the alerting, routing, escalation, and coordination, was held together with duct tape and prayer. The cost of getting this wrong was already becoming quantifiable. A 2013 study by Gartner estimated that the average cost of IT downtime was $5,600 per minute for a large enterprise. For a customer-facing e-commerce site during peak traffic, an hour of downtime could mean hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in lost revenue. The monitoring tools could detect the problem in seconds. The ticketing systems could track the resolution over days. But the gap between detection and the first human response, the minutes when an alert sat in an inbox or a text went unanswered, was where the real damage accumulated. That gap was the problem no one had properly solved. 3 engineers at Amazon were about to change that. The story of PagerDuty's founding does not begin in a garage or a dorm room. It begins in the corridors of Amazon's engineering organization, where 3 University of Waterloo graduates were living the very problem they would eventually solve. Alex Solomon, Bhaskar Puvanathasan, and Andrew Miklas had all worked as software development engineers at Amazon. They knew firsthand what it meant to be on call. At Amazon, the practice was literally called being on PagerDuty, because engineers carried physical pagers that would buzz when something went wrong. The experience was formative, but also maddening. Amazon had built sophisticated internal tools for incident management, but these tools were proprietary. unavailable to the broader market. Outside of a handful of tech giants, the rest of the industry was still stitching together manual processes, email chains, and shared spreadsheets. Solomon was the strategist and leader. He held a Bachelor of Applied Science in Computer Engineering from Waterloo, class of 2006, and would serve as PagerDuty's first CEO through the company's formative years. Puvanathasan brought deep infrastructure engineering expertise, having worked on back-end systems at Amazon and previously at BlackBerry. Miklas was the technical architect, the engineer who designed PagerDuty's original high-availability architecture, a system that, by definition, needed to be more reliable than anything it monitored. If your alerting system goes down when a critical service fails, nobody gets paged, nobody gets woken up, and a manageable incident becomes a catastrophe. That architectural requirement, building something that essentially cannot fail, shaped the entire engineering culture from day one. The three co-founders quit Amazon and brainstormed ideas by thinking about internal tools that Amazon had built in-house that would be useful to companies of all sizes. Puvanathasan remembered the frustration of carrying a physical pager, the anxiety of wondering whether an alert would actually reach you, and the chaos when escalation policies existed only in someone's head. The realization crystallized. There was no good commercial product for on-call incident management. On February 18, 2009, they pushed their first commit to GitHub. The company name was not the product of a branding exercise. It was simply what Amazon engineers called the rotation, PagerDuty. The initial product was elegantly focused. PagerDuty connected to monitoring tools like Nagios and routed alerts to the right person via phone call, SMS, email, or push notification based on configurable on-call schedules and escalation policies. If the first person did not acknowledge the alert within a set time, the system would automatically escalate to the next person in the chain. No spreadsheets. No hoping someone checks their email. No lost alerts. The brilliance was not in any single feature, but in the systematic approach to a problem that everyone had been solving with ad hoc workarounds. The founders launched their beta on Hacker News in August 2009, and the response validated their thesis immediately. Engineers understood the value because they had all experienced the pain. PagerDuty was not a solution looking for a problem. It was an answer to a prayer that thousands of on-call engineers had been muttering at 3 a.m. while fumbling for their phones. In the summer of 2010, PagerDuty was accepted into Y Combinator's S10 batch. The three co-founders relocated from Toronto to a cramped apartment off El Camino Real in Mountain View, California. Y Combinator provided more than seed funding. It gave PagerDuty access to a network of technically sophisticated founders and early adopters who were exactly the kind of users the product was built for. In the YC batch, surrounded by other developer tool startups, PagerDuty refined its pitch. This is the tool that wakes you up when your product breaks and makes sure the right person is handling the problem. Early customers included some of the most respected names in the emerging cloud ecosystem. Companies like GitHub and Twilio, organizations that were themselves building the infrastructure of the modern internet. These were not just customers, but evangelists. Engineers who told other engineers about the tool that had transformed their on-call experience. The land and expand DNA was present from the very beginning. A single team at a company would adopt PagerDuty. Other teams would see the improvement in response times and coordination, and within months, the product would spread across the organization. The product sold itself because the pain it addressed was universal, and the relief was immediate. What made this organic adoption so powerful was its authenticity. Solomon, Puvanathasan, and Miklas were not building a theoretical solution to an abstract market opportunity. They were building the tool they wished they had at Amazon. Developers could sense that PagerDuty was built by people who understood their world, and that trust proved to be PagerDuty's most durable competitive advantage in the years ahead. Miklas, the technical co-founder, would go on to become a general partner at Y Combinator itself, a testament to the caliber of talent in PagerDuty's founding team. Puvanathasan eventually departed to found Borg IQ, an RPA company, in 2019. Solomon remained with the company through its most consequential years, guiding the technical vision through the platform pivot and public offering. The founding team's eventual dispersal was natural and healthy, but the product and culture they established in those early years, obsessive reliability, developer empathy, and organic adoption, remained PagerDuty's defining characteristics long after they moved on. The post-Y Combinator period for PagerDuty was a masterclass in product-led growth before the term was widely used. The company did not need to convince engineers that on-call alerting was important. Every developer who had ever been woken up by a broken system already knew. What PagerDuty needed to prove was that its product was reliable enough to trust with the most critical operational workflow any engineering team has. Reliability was existential, not aspirational. If your alerting system fails when a critical service goes down, you do not just lose a customer, you lose the entire premise of your product. The team invested heavily in building a system with redundancy across multiple carriers for phone and SMS delivery, failover mechanisms across data centers, and an architecture designed to survive the very kinds of infrastructure failures it was built to detect. In a delicious irony, PagerDuty needed to be the most reliable software product in its customers' entire stack, more reliable than the services it was monitoring. The company maintained contracts with multiple telephony carriers so that if one carrier experienced an outage, alerts could still be delivered through alternative channels. This multi-carrier redundancy was a significant engineering investment, but also a competitive moat. Building truly reliable notification delivery is harder than it looks, and many competitors cut corners that became apparent only during actual incidents. The freemium strategy was textbook and effective. Small teams could get started for free or at very low cost. Once PagerDuty became embedded in a team's operational workflow, once the on-call schedules were configured, the escalation policies were tuned, and the integrations with monitoring tools were wired up, expanding to other teams within the same organization was a natural, almost inevitable motion. Each new team created more integration touchpoints, more customized workflows, and more organizational muscle memory. In 2013, PagerDuty raised a $10.7 million Series A, led by Andreessen Horowitz. The A16Z imprimatur was a powerful signal. This was the firm that had backed Facebook, GitHub, and a growing roster of developer tools companies. But the round also brought in Jesse Robbins, co-founder of OpsCode, later renamed Chef, and a legendary figure in the DevOps community. Robbins was known as the Master of Disaster from his time at Amazon, where he had helped build the company's operational resilience practices. His investment brought deep credibility with the exact audience PagerDuty was selling to. By this point, the company had grown from a handful of founders to roughly 60 employees and was building out its initial executive team. A year later, in July 2014, Bessemer Venture Partners led a $27.2 million Series B. The milestone behind this round told the story. PagerDuty had crossed $10 million in annual recurring revenue by summer 2014. That number sounds modest until you consider how it was achieved, driven almost entirely by word of mouth and product-led adoption. The company was not spending heavily on enterprise sales teams or massive marketing campaigns. Engineers were telling other engineers, and the product was expanding within organizations under its own momentum. The competitive landscape at this stage was fragmented but manageable. Nagios still dominated monitoring, but offered no sophisticated alerting. OpsGenie, founded in 2012, was emerging as a direct competitor with similar alert routing features. VictorOps, founded in 2013, focused on collaborative incident management. But PagerDuty had the critical advantages of being first, having the strongest brand in the DevOps community, and accumulating a growing library of integrations with monitoring and DevOps tools. The pricing model evolved as the customer base matured. Per-user pricing created natural expansion revenue as teams grew, but it also planted a vulnerability that would become painfully visible years later. When companies shrink their engineering teams, seat-based revenue contracts. More significantly, PagerDuty began to recognize that its real value was not just in alerting, but in the workflow and coordination that happened after an alert was triggered. Who acknowledges the alert? Who else should be brought in? What context do they need? How is the incident tracked through resolution? These questions pointed toward a much larger opportunity than routing phone calls and text messages. By mid-2016, the numbers reflected the momentum. 90% year-over-year revenue GDK, 95% year-over-year enterprise revenue growth, and 1,200 new customers added in the first half of the year alone. PagerDuty had established itself as the undisputed category leader. But the insight that would define the NGK chapter was already forming. Being the best alerting tool in the world was necessary but insufficient. If PagerDuty remained a single-purpose tool, it would face the inevitable pressures of commoditization and bundling. The question was not whether GDK a platform, but how fast. In the annals of enterprise software, there is a well-worn script for what happens to successful point solutions. They either expand into platforms, get acquired by larger vendors who bundle their functionality, or slowly watch their position erode as competitors replicate their features and undercut their pricing. By 2015, PagerDuty's leadership could see all three scenarios on the horizon, and they chose to take their destiny into their own hands. The existential question was stark. Are we just a pager? PagerDuty had built a dominant position in a market it had essentially created, but that market was narrowly defined. On-call alerting and scheduling is critical, but also relatively simple. The core technology, routing notifications based on schedules and escalation policies, was not defensible through patents or proprietary algorithms. Any well-funded competitor could replicate the basic functionality, and several were trying. OpsGenie was growing quickly and competing aggressively on pricing. VictorOps was carving out a niche around collaborative incident response. Slack, which had exploded in popularity since its 2013 launch, was becoming the de facto communication hub for engineering teams and adding alerting integrations. Most ominously, the large platform players, Atlassian, ServiceNow, and the emerging observability vendors were all eyeing incident management as a logical extension of their existing products. In enterprise software, the bundling threat is the most dangerous kind. When a customer can get 80% of your functionality included for free in a product they already pay for, your pricing power evaporates. This was the context in which Jennifer Tejada joined PagerDuty as CEO on July 21, 2016. Tejada brought a background precisely calibrated for the challenge ahead. She had served as CEO of Keynote Systems, a digital performance management company that she led to strong, profitable GDK through its acquisition by Dynatrace. Before that, she held executive roles at Mincom in enterprise asset management, at Procter & Gamble, and at i2 Technologies. A University of Michigan Ross School of Business graduate, Tejada combined strategic vision with deep enterprise GK market experience. Exactly what PagerDuty needed GDK needed, its developer tool roots. Alex Solomon's decision to step aside as CEO and move to the CTO role was a mature and self-aware choice that deserves more recognition than it typically receives. Solomon recognized that the skills needed to build a product and find product-market fit were different from the skills needed to transform a developer tool into an enterprise platform and take it public gay. He wanted to focus on the technology while bringing in an operator who could reposition the company and scale the business. This kind of clean founder succession is rare and invaluable. Tejada's strategic reframe was decisive. PagerDuty would no longer be positioned as an incident alerting tool. It would become a digital operations management platform. The distinction might sound like marketing semantics, but it had profound implications for the product roadmap, pricing strategy, go-to-market approach, and total addressable market. An alerting tool solves one specific problem for one specific persona, the on-call engineer. A digital operations management platform, GDK through response, through resolution, through post-mortem learning. The TAM for alerting tools might be $2 to $3 billion. The TAM for digital operations management was estimated at $25 billion or more. Same company, same core product, but a radically different market narrative. The product expansion unfolded across several dimensions. Event Intelligence, launched in 2016, applied machine learning to reduce alert noise, grouping related alerts, suppressing duplicates, and surfacing the most critical signals from the fire hose of monitoring data. This was a meaningful evolution because alert fatigue had become one of the GDK problems in modern operations. Engineers were drowning in notifications, most of which were false positives or low priority. A system that could intelligently filter and prioritize was worth significantly more than one that simply routed everything indiscriminately. Response Mobilizer expanded incident response beyond the primary on-call engineer to enable coordinated, multi-team responses for major incidents. Analytics and reporting features GDK leaders visibility into metrics like mean time to acknowledge and mean time GDK resolve, enabling data-driven improvement. ChatOps integrations connected PagerDuty with the communication tools where engineers already worked. In April 2017, PagerDuty raised a $43.8 million Series C led by Excel, explicitly positioned around the platform thesis. 18 months later, a $90 million Series D led by T. Rowe Price and Wellington Management set the stage for the IPO, bringing total pre-IPO funding to approximately $173 million. The platform pivot changed PagerDuty's economic model in ways that matter enormously for investors. A single-purpose alerting tool has a natural ceiling on per-user pricing. A platform that handles the entire incident lifecycle, with intelligence, automation, and analytics layered on top, can command significantly higher prices and drive expansion within existing accounts. It transformed the company from a tool developers adopted bottom-up into a platform that could be sold top-down to engineering leadership and CIOs. It created switching costs that the alerting product alone could never generate. Once an organization's incident response workflows, runbooks, escalation policies, and operational analytics are built on PagerDuty, ripping it out is painful and risky. Most importantly, the platform positioning gave PagerDuty a narrative that could sustain a public company valuation. Wall Street does not get excited about paging systems. It gets very excited about platforms addressing a $25 billion plus market opportunity in digital operations. On April 11, 2019, PagerDuty shares began trading on the New York Stock Exchange under the ticker PD. The company priced its offering at $24 per share, above the already raised range of $21 to $23, reflecting strong institutional demand. PagerDuty sold approximately 9 million shares and raised roughly $218 million. The implied market capitalization was approximately $1.8 billion. The first day told a story of euphoria. Shares opened at $36.75 and closed above $38, a nearly 60% premium to the offering price. PagerDuty was one of the hottest tech IPOs of early 2019, part of a vintage class that included Zoom, Pinterest, Uber, and Lyft. Within 2 months, shares reached an all-time high of $59.82, implying a market capitalization approaching $6 billion. For a company that had generated $118 million in revenue in the fiscal year ending January 2019, that was a heady valuation of roughly 50 times revenue. Andreessen Horowitz, which had led the Series A in 2013, at a fraction of this valuation, saw its pre-IPO stake valued at approximately $284 million. A spectacular return on a $10.7 million round that demonstrated the venture math behind early-stage developer tools investing. The IPO narrative leaned heavily on the platform thesis and the scale of the digital economy. PagerDuty's S-1 filing painted a picture of a $117 billion digital economy that demanded real-time operational management. The company highlighted its net revenue retention rate above 120%, meaning existing customers were spending 20+% more each year, even before new customer acquisition. Along with 700+ integrations and deep penetration among Fortune 500 companies. But public market life brought new pressures immediately. Wall Street demanded the dual mandate that all high-growth SaaS companies face: grow fast and show a path to profitability. The Rule of 40. The benchmark that a company's revenue growth rate plus its profit margin should sum to at least 40 became a key metric investors tracked. PagerDuty's growth was strong, but not hypergrowth by SaaS standards, and its path to profitability was measured in years, not quarters. The competitive dynamics intensified under the public spotlight. Atlassian had acquired OpsGenie for $295 million in September 2018. Splunk acquired VictorOps for $120 million in June 2018. These acquisitions validated the market PagerDuty had created, but highlighted the bundling threat. OpsGenie was now available to the millions of teams already using Jira and Confluence. VictorOps, rebranded as Splunk On Call, was bundled with Splunk's monitoring platform. After the initial euphoria, shares drifted lower. Revenue grew from $166 million in fiscal year 2020 to $371 million in fiscal year 2023. Healthy compound annual growth of roughly 30%. But net revenue retention began its slow, consequential decline from the 120+% levels at IPO. The market was asking harder questions about long-term margins, competitive positioning, and whether PagerDuty could sustain its growth rate as the category matured. The stock trajectory since the June 2019 peak has been painful. The shares traded in a volatile range through the pandemic era, reaching the mid-$40s during the growth stock euphoria of early 2021, but never recapturing the all-time high. The broader tech sell-off of 2022, triggered by rising interest rates and a sharp rotation away from high-multiple growth stocks, hit PagerDuty particularly hard. The stock fell through $20, then $15, then $10 as each successive earnings report showed continued growth deceleration. As of early 2026, shares trade around $6.50, having touched a 52-week low of $6.18 in late February. The current market capitalization sits at approximately $670 million. Roughly 1/9 of the peak valuation. This decline reflects the brutal repricing of mid-growth SaaS companies as interest rates rose, revenue growth decelerated from 30+% to single digits, and investors demanded profitability over growth at all costs.
The irony is that PagerDuty, by most operational measures, has executed reasonably well as a public company. It has expanded its product portfolio, grown its customer base, improved its margins, and recently achieved GAAP profitability. The problem is not that the business is broken. It is that the market's expectations at the time of the IPO were for a different growth trajectory than what materialized. There is a myth worth dispelling here. The conventional narrative is that PagerDuty's stock decline reflects operational failure. The reality is more nuanced. Revenue nearly quadrupled from the fiscal year of the IPO to fiscal year 2026. Gross margins remained in the mid to high 80% range. The customer base expanded significantly, and the company reached GAAP profitability. What changed was the multiple the market was willing to pay for that growth. At 50 times revenue, the stock priced in a decade of hypergrowth. When growth decelerated from 30+% to single digits, the multiple compressed violently. The business improved while the stock cratered. A pattern that SaaS investors have seen repeatedly across the sector during the 2022 to 2025 repricing. When the world shut down in March 2020, PagerDuty found itself at the center of one of the most dramatic accelerations in digital transformation in business history. Every company, seemingly overnight, needed to operate as a digital company. Physical retail moved to e-commerce. In-person meetings moved to video. Paper processes moved to software. And all of that software needed to work around the clock, because there was no fallback. You could not just send customers to a physical store if the website went down. PagerDuty's own data captured the scale of the shift. Critical incidents across its platform increased by 19% year over year from 2019 to 2020. That number understates the disruption. The nature of incidents changed, not just their frequency. Healthcare systems needed reliable telemedicine platforms. School districts needed functioning e-learning infrastructure. Government agencies needed working digital services for citizens who could not visit offices in person. The organizations that had treated digital operations as a secondary concern suddenly discovered it was everything. More than a third of PagerDuty users reported working less consistent hours during the pandemic,
with patterns suggesting an average of 2 extra hours per day, the equivalent of 12 additional weeks of work per year. The boundaries between work and personal time, already blurred for on-call engineers, effectively dissolved. The remote work dimension added a new layer of complexity to incident response that played directly to PagerDuty's strengths. In a pre-pandemic world, when a major incident occurred, engineers could physically gather in a war room, tap a colleague on the shoulder, or rely on the informal communication networks that supplement any formal process. When everyone was working from home, those informal channels vanished. Suddenly, the formal systems for coordinating incident response, the on-call schedules, escalation policies, communication integrations, and workflow tools, became not merely useful, but essential. ChatOps adoption across PagerDuty's platform jumped 22% as distributed teams compensated for the loss of physical proximity. The financial impact was positive, but not transformative. Fiscal year 2021 revenue came in at $213.6 million, up 28.4% year over year. The growth rate actually decelerated slightly from the pre-pandemic trajectory, which sounds counterintuitive until you examine the customer mix. While many organizations expanded their digital operations, others, particularly in travel, hospitality, and events, slashed spending. PagerDuty also offered concessions and extended free trials to financially pressured organizations, a decision that strengthened long-term relationships but muted near-term revenue. Fiscal year 2022 saw acceleration to 31.8% growth, with revenue reaching $281.4 million as deferred demand converted to paid contracts. The competitive landscape also intensified during this period. ServiceNow expanded aggressively into AIOps and incident management. Datadog, riding the cloud monitoring wave to a market capitalization that would dwarf PagerDuty's many times over, added incident management capabilities. These were not fringe competitors. They were well-capitalized platform companies that viewed incident management as a natural extension of their existing products and customer relationships. PagerDuty capitalized on the pandemic disruption, but the honest assessment is that it did not capture a disproportionate share of the opportunity relative to its competitive position. The company grew solidly, but it did not pull away from the competition or establish the kind of market dominance that the moment seemed to demand. This would become a recurring theme: consistently good, rarely breakaway. The pandemic era also surfaced an important dynamic in PagerDuty's business model. The customer base expanded to over 16,000 companies and 700,000 users by mid-2021. But the nature of that growth was broad rather than deep. PagerDuty was adding customers, but not dramatically increasing the spend per customer. The net retention rate, while still healthy above 120%, was not accelerating, despite the massive increase in digital operational complexity. This suggested that while PagerDuty was essential, it was not capturing as much of the operational management wallet as the platform strategy intended. Customers were using PagerDuty for alerting and basic incident coordination, but were not uniformly adopting the higher-tier event intelligence and automation products at the pace management hoped for. As the pandemic-era digital acceleration began to normalize, the question of how PagerDuty would reignite growth became increasingly urgent. If the pandemic was a tailwind that PagerDuty rode capably, the rise of artificial intelligence represents a crosswind that could either propel the company to new heights or render significant portions of its value proposition obsolete. The stakes are as high as they have been since the founding. The core problem AI addresses in operations is one of signal and noise. And to appreciate why this matters, consider the scale of modern monitoring. A typical enterprise application generates an extraordinary volume of telemetry data. Every server reports CPU usage, memory consumption, disk space, and network throughput. Every application reports error rates, response times, and transaction volumes. Every cloud service generates logs, metrics, and traces. The total volume can reach millions of data points per second. Out of this ocean, monitoring systems might generate thousands of alerts per day. Most are noise, brief, transient spikes, expected variations, or cascading symptoms of a single underlying problem. The challenge is separating signal from noise, identifying the alerts that actually require human attention, and increasingly, resolving them without human intervention at all. PagerDuty had been building toward this for years. The event intelligence capabilities launched during the platform pivot applied machine learning to reduce alert noise and correlate related events. But it was the company's October 2020 acquisition of Rundeck for approximately $100 million that signaled a serious commitment to automation. Rundeck was an open-source leader in runbook automation, software that allows operations teams to codify their incident response procedures into executable scripts that can be triggered automatically. Think of it as turning the human instinct of, when X happens, I do Y, into software that executes Y automatically when X is detected. In March 2022, PagerDuty acquired Catalytic for $68.8 million, adding no-code workflow automation capabilities that extended automation beyond IT operations into broader business processes. And in November 2023, the company acquired Jelly for $29.7 million, bringing in incident analysis and post-mortem learning tools that completed the incident lifecycle from detection through retrospective learning. The total acquisition spend across all three deals was approximately $200 million, a reasonable investment for capabilities that materially expanded the platform. PagerDuty launched PagerDuty AIOps in April 2023, bringing machine learning capabilities into a cohesive product. The results reported by early customers were striking, an 87% reduction in alert noise, meaning that out of every 100 alerts, only 13 required human attention. Automated incident response deployed 9 times faster than manual processes. To put that in practical terms, what used to take an engineer 30 minutes of manual investigation and escalation could now be accomplished in under 4 minutes through AI-driven triage and automation. In the fall of 2023, generative AI features followed. Automated incident summaries in plain English, natural language action recommendations, and AI-assisted root cause analysis. When a major incident occurs and multiple engineers are joining the response, the AI can generate a real-time summary of what happened, what has been tried, and what the likely root cause is, eliminating the costly minutes spent catching up by reading through log files and chat history. The competitive pressure in AI ops is fierce. Datadog has integrated AI directly into its monitoring to incident workflow. ServiceNow's AI-powered IT operations management extends into predictive capacity planning. Splunk, now owned by Cisco following its $28 billion acquisition, completed in March 2024, has deep roots in machine learning for operational data. Every major observability vendor, New Relic, Dynatrace, Elastic, has invested heavily in similar capabilities. PagerDuty's most ambitious AI bet arrived in the second half of 2025 with its end-to-end AI agent suite. The SRE agent, which reached general availability on October 31, 2025, goes beyond recommendations to active participation. It runs diagnostics, surfaces context, suggests remediation, and learns from each incident. Just yesterday, on March 12, 2026, PagerDuty unveiled its Spring 2026 release, pushing toward what CEO Tejada calls autonomous operations. The headline feature is the SRE agent, evolving into a virtual responder that can be integrated directly into on-call rotations, meaning the AI agent can be the first responder to an incident, performing triage and potentially resolving the issue before a human is even woken up. Perhaps most intriguing is the agent-to-agent functionality. PagerDuty's SRE agent can interact with cloud providers' AI agents, like AWS DevOps Agent and Azure AI SRE, through the Model Context Protocol. This creates what the company describes as a collaborative multi-agent fabric, where multiple AI agents from different vendors coordinate to diagnose and resolve incidents across complex, multi-cloud environments. Whether this vision translates into revenue or remains a marketing narrative is the central question for the next several years. The strategic question for investors is existential. If AI can automatically detect, diagnose, and resolve most operational incidents, Does the world still need a dedicated incident management platform? Or does it need that platform more than ever? As the coordination hub that connects AI agents, human responders, and organizational processes. PagerDuty is betting on the latter. The answer will determine whether the company's $670 million market capitalization represents deep value or a fair assessment of a narrowing competitive position. It is worth noting a controversy that briefly overshadowed PagerDuty's strategic execution. In January 2023, when the company announced a 7% workforce reduction affecting roughly 66 employees, CEO Tejada drew criticism for quoting Martin Luther King Jr. in the layoff announcement email. The public backlash was swift. Quoting a civil rights icon in the context of job cuts struck many as tone-deaf, and Tejada publicly apologized. The episode was a minor but memorable stumble in an otherwise steady tenure, and a reminder that even experienced leaders can misjudge the emotional register of difficult communications. PagerDuty's business model has evolved from a simple per-user subscription for alerting into a multi-product platform with tiered pricing designed to drive expansion revenue. Understanding this evolution is key to assessing both the company's strengths and its current challenges. The product portfolio now spans three main pillars: incident management, the core alerting and on-call product; AIOps, which includes event intelligence, noise reduction, and automated triage; and process automation, built primarily on the Rundeck acquisition, which enables teams to codify and automate operational procedures. Each pillar has its own pricing tier, and customers can adopt them independently or together. The idea is that a customer starts with incident management and, over time, adds AIOps and process automation as they mature in their operational practices. A classic land and expand motion. The go-to-market approach blends two strategies that are sometimes in tension. Product-led growth, PagerDuty's foundational DNA, allows individual developers and small teams to sign up with minimal friction, creating a pipeline of potential expansion opportunities. This bottoms-up motion is efficient but slow to generate large deal sizes. Layered on top is an enterprise sales force that targets larger deals, selling the platform story to engineering leadership and CIOs who can authorize broader deployments and higher-tier products. The challenge is that these two motions can conflict. Enterprise sales teams want complex, customizable products that justify premium pricing, while product-led growth depends on simplicity and self-service. Finding the right balance is one of the defining challenges of PagerDuty's current go-to-market strategy. The per-user pricing model creates a natural growth mechanism when companies add engineers, but it also creates a vulnerability that has become painfully visible. When companies undergo layoffs or efficiency drives, as many technology companies did during 2023 and 2024, right-sizing after the pandemic hiring boom, seat counts shrink and PagerDuty's revenue contracts. This seat compression dynamic is a meaningful contributor to the current growth deceleration. The partner ecosystem has grown to more than 700 integrations, connecting PagerDuty with monitoring tools, communication platforms, ticketing systems, cloud providers, and dozens of other tools in the DevOps stack. Each integration deepens embeddedness in a customer's operational infrastructure, creating switching costs that transcend the product's core functionality. Ripping out PagerDuty means reconfiguring integrations with potentially dozens of other tools, not just replacing the alerting system. Net revenue retention, the metric that measures whether existing customers spend more or less over time, tells the most important story about PagerDuty's business health and is one of the key KPIs investors should track closely. At the time of the IPO, this metric was above 120%, meaning existing customers spent 20+% more each year. It has been on a steady, concerning decline, to 107% by fiscal year 2024, to 106% by fiscal year 2025, and most recently to 100%. A net retention rate of 100% means existing customers are, in aggregate, spending exactly the same as a year ago. The expansion engine has stalled. The company has been growing its base of high-value enterprise customers. 867 customers now spend more than $100,000 annually, up from 825 the prior year. This is the second critical KPI to track. The growth rate of these large account relationships reflects whether PagerDuty's platform strategy is gaining traction in the accounts that matter most for long-term revenue stability. On the positive side, fiscal year 2026, which ended January 31st, 2026, marked PagerDuty's first full year of GAAP profitability, with fourth quarter net income of $11 million and non-GAAP operating margins in the mid-20s% range. Non-GAAP gross margins are approximately 87%, firmly in premium SaaS territory. The profitability achievement reflects disciplined cost management, including a painful 7% workforce reduction in January 2023 that cut roughly 66 positions. The revenue trajectory tells its own story. From $118 million in fiscal year 2019 to $493 million in fiscal year 2026, PagerDuty roughly quadrupled its revenue. But the growth rate has decelerated steadily, from roughly 41% in fiscal year 2020 to 32% in fiscal years 2022 and 2023, to 16% in fiscal year 2024, to 9% in fiscal year 2025, and finally to approximately 5% in fiscal year 2026. The company is approaching the $500 million revenue mark, but at a pace that suggests maturation rather than continued hypergrowth. Annual recurring revenue reached $499 million, tantalizingly close to the symbolic $500 million threshold, but growing at only 3%. The company can be run profitably at current growth rates. The question is whether profitable stagnation is an acceptable outcome for a company that went public on a growth narrative, or whether it signals the need for a strategic alternative.